And we're rolling. Hi, this is Peter Teuscher. Welcome back to our podcast. I'm here with Toby Demker, and this is our discussion around all things personal development, leadership, and cultural change, and a bunch of different philosophical topics. We basically pick a topic and see where the conversation leads us. So, how are you doing today, Toby?
I'm good, thanks. It's just post Easter now, and we still got a little bit of snow outside. I'm still waiting for spring to break through, but it's getting there.
I know. It was almost, on the weekend, it was almost 20 degrees where I am in the south of Germany this weekend. And then all of a sudden, a colleague posted me a picture of snow in Munich. And I'm like, big
Oh, really?
contrast,
Yeah.
big contrast. So anyway, just jumping right into the conversation today. My turn to pick today. So I would like to talk about recognizing fear. And, fear is something that is a fundamental piece of my personal philosophy. I have kind of a foundation. It's one of the core elements of that. And I think today I'd really like to talk about, fear in the sense that it's a major resistance for us. It's also can be a driver for our choices and decisions in life. It's important to recognize the way fear impacts us in terms of our behaviors and actions. And there was a famous quote, and I can't remember who, but it goes, "A life lived in fear is a life half lived," something like that. I think it's a really important thing to sort of recognize and understand how it affects you, and just it's obviously it's not about the presence of fear. It's how you respond to it, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for any kind of personal development, obviously, awareness around your fears is something that is really central to your development. I mean, I think you mentioned a little bit what it is, but it's also a force of protection, right? I mean, the fears are there to actually protect us. So it's essentially they are something really good for us. It's just to how do you manage it and how do you react, or how do you manage your reactions to the fear, and what is that doing to your behavior, really, right?
Yeah, I think from my own philosophy, I don't see fear as much as a protection mechanism as sort of this kind of resistance, this challenge for us. I think if we live intuitively and we are very aware, then we don't really need fear. I think we know to make the right choices, but in the absence of that, absolutely, fear is this signal that there's a danger. But I think it goes deeper than that. I remember when I was on safari, and I think I may have even told you the story before. I was in safari and in Africa, and the guide was saying, all these gazelles, if you if there's a lion or a group of lions that are hunting, whether they make a kill or not, once the danger's over, they go back to grazing like nothing had happened. And
Yeah.
we as human beings, we've got this cognitive ability to think about the past and look into the future, and we spend a lot of time in those states and in a fear state. So we allow the potential danger, that something that might happen in the future, or things that, what if it would have, unfolded differently in the past. We let those kind of things affect our present state and also our future decisions. So, so unlike the animal kingdom where they release fear fairly quickly, we tend to be immobilized by it. We are sometimes paralyzed by it, just the thought of it, even if it's not present in our current moment.
Yeah, but it's also, I mean, it's kind of a warning system. I frequently wake up kind of in the middle of the night, not in any form of anxiety, but with a little bit of a worry, or a little bit of fear that I've forgotten something, or I realize, oh, I haven't gotten these details together, whatever it is, right? But this fear of not being kind of committing to what I'm supposed to deliver, or whatever. That kind of, I mean, that could be a fear of failure, or of not being seen to be professional, or whatever, right? It could be many different things. And in those terms, is kind of a driver for me, and it's supporting me to, get my stuff together, really.
Yeah, I think fear can be a very strong driver. And I think for me as a coach, I question people whether fear is the right driver for because if you're being driven by fear, are you making the best choices for you and your situation? Do you find that you make the
Yeah.
best choices when you're afraid of the outcome?
I mean, generally not, definitely not. But it can be, it can, well, it's a system, right? For me,
Hmm.
it can be an alarm system that, oh, that, you have to pay attention to this. So, but if it's obviously, I mean, I totally agree with that. If it's driving your behaviors on a long-term basis, that's not going to be healthy for you.
Hmm.
And interestingly enough, we just had a class with my students, and we were talking about, actually they had the class. It was really interesting. I have students, and they have to organize a class once in a while, and we talked about um, well, the essence of the class is really, like, what I call playing to win or playing not to lose,
Hmm.
right? And it's a really big difference in those dynamics. If fear is pushing your game, or if you're willing to win and play the full game with a little bit of risk, what does that do for your performance? And there was the story about forgot his name now, but Warren Bennis had written about him, that he was walking on lines between buildings, like really far up. Maybe you've heard this story, but he did that his whole life, and he was really successful. But the last one, he fell off. And the weeks prior to that, he kind of, his mindset shifted to, this what if I fall kind of
Hmm.
mentality, and then that actually happened. And we're talking about some of the lessons that leaders can learn from that. What kind of mindset is healthy and helpful for you in your sort of leadership ecosystem?
Absolutely, and that's a perfect example. I actually, when I'm coaching people, and we're talking about the things that they're striving for, the goals that they're setting for themselves, I tend to ask them, so are you are you working towards something or running away from something? Because sometimes people want to have a change in their life because they're trying to get away from their current situation, and it's kind of, well, anything different than where I am, rather than going towards something that they're really passionate about, or something that really intrigues them, or is driven by their
Mm,
curiosity. So there's a huge difference between going towards something you want or running away from something you don't want, and that ties very nicely into what you were just talking about.
mm. Yeah, and I mean, from a methodological point of view, an instrument that I've been working with is called the Leadership Circle,
Hmm.
and that it's I might have talked about this before, but anyway, I think I talked a lot about false assumptions and what how that can affect you. And on if I talk just a little bit about the leadership circle, you have creative and reactive patterns or behaviors. And the reactive ones are driven more by fear or by false assumptions. And with this instrument, you really have an opportunity to look at them and dissect them and digest what the fears are or what the false assumptions are. And they can be around sort of controlling aspects, that you're really fighting for something and you need to have stuff in place, and kind of micromanaging and competing and that kind of stuff. And there's something about avoidance, and that can be a bit of arrogance, or taking a distant view from something, just to make creating a space between you and the problem. And then it can be something more with complying, that you're leaning into trying to go, trying to play nice or to satisfy others or something like that, right? And I mean, all of these are kind of tactics or strategies that we start nurturing as kids, actually, to get what we want. But then but it's really interesting when you look into this and you realize that you have another option, right? To play the game to win, if you use that metaphor, right? And utilize more of the creative behaviors and patterns. that you have a whole range of opportunities to play with a little bit more authenticity or purpose or whatever it is to make a difference. And that is that mindset shift, right? To playing to win or playing not to lose, or what is your will to achieve something driving you, or the will of not failing driving you, and it becomes a really big difference.
Yeah.
And if you just look at the numbers from that, when we're talking about leadership effectiveness, that the creative patterns are so much more effective, or the correlation between those behaviors and leadership effectiveness are so much higher and positive than the reactive sides.
Yeah, and I think the most effective leaders I've ever met are those who understand how to manage their fear. I don't think fear is necessarily a bad thing or something that you should completely get out of. I don't think there's anyone that completely can get it out of their lives. It's all about how you deal with it, and I think the best leaders that I've ever been in contact with or witnessed are those who are really understand the role that fear plays and manage it very well, and are able to, put it into, keep things in perspective, frame things in a way where the fear doesn't control them. They're aware of it, but it doesn't control them. But the point you were making about how, these strategies that we develop as children, that's an important piece of what I wanted to talk about today in terms of recognizing fear in your life is, sometimes the strategies and behaviors we've developed in our adult life come from younger years, and they're based in a fear from the past that we may no longer be aware of, but that pattern of behavior still exists because of that fear. We bring with us out of our childhood, a fear of not being good enough, or fear of failure, or fear of being abandoned, people not liking us, all these kind of things. And so just being aware of these kind of fear-based drivers is really important, because they affect the decisions we make, whether it's on a private level or even in the workplace. I see people at a reasonably high level, at management level, who are clearly acting out things from, that you could parallel to a toddler having a tantrum, or, and they've just got an adult version of it. And a lot of these behaviors are fear-driven. But I think the other piece that I want to look at and talk about, I think, before we even continue, is just remembering the state that fear puts you in, right? We've talked about this before, where, the fight, flight, or freeze response, and how, that's not just in the wild with animals, right? We experience in our own version of it in our daily lives, where we become aggressive when we're afraid. Some people do. Some people run away from a situation, or they take an avoidant strategy. And some people are just, they're paralyzed by the situation. But also on a physical level, how, it increases your cortisol. Maybe it gets your adrenaline going, but also it gives you don't have a full perspective. It gives you kind of tunnel vision. These fear stress responses don't put you in an optimal state. They can, in the short term, make you respond quickly and overcome. Fear can be, as you said before, a big driver, and it can help you. If it's the difference between the one stronger fear over the other, you can find in that moment big motivation, like a real strong desire and drive to move forward. But the question is, for me, on an ongoing basis for the long term, is that the right strategy? I'm a big believer in having a clear vision, and then the fear can really build our resilience, really create the challenges that we overcome and become more confident. But I think if it becomes a regular driver in your life, that the things that really drive you forward or get you out of bed in the morning are fear-based, I don't think that's a healthy way to live.
Oh, no, not at all. I totally agree. I mean, I think we have to just acknowledge that, fear it's a system there that can drive us, it can protect us, it can be good, but it's just about, how do we manage it, and how do we deal with it, and how do we live with them in a healthy way? we all have things that we're very scared of and that we have fear of, but just by education or by awareness, we deal with them in more or less productive ways, right? I get many people like me were afraid of snakes, and I can have nightmares about snakes, right? But um, I would never get a snake as a pet, of course. But nowadays, if I encounter a snake, which I've done at a few occasions, and I can view them, I can also enjoy them and see that wow, it's a fantastic creature. I don't want to cuddle with it, but I can really respect it and enjoy it. And yeah,
That's
it's
interesting. That's interesting because living in Sweden, do you have a lot of snakes?
no.
Yeah.
Only one kind that is kind of poisonous, but not really too poisonous either. So,
Okay.
I mean, it's just probably a TV show or something that I saw when I was a kid that made me afraid of them, or it's a DNA thing, that we have the human. I don't know about this, right? But maybe the human race have developed some kind of warning system for poisonous animals, like you should stay away from this. I don't know.
Well, we're only born with two fears: the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises, right? So those are our innate fears. Everything else is developed and learned through our childhood. So it's probably more likely that you saw Anaconda, or you, like I remember for me as a kid seeing Jaws at the drive-in with my I'm really dating myself, the drive-in with my parents, but because it was back in the 70s, and that that clearly made me afraid of sharks. I mean, it created a story and an image in my mind, and it even affected me later on when I started surfing. Not that I'm a good surfer by any means, but I remember being on the Oregon coast, and where we were at the tourist information, the lady had said, "Oh, you shouldn't go surfing. There's sharks out there. There was recently a shark attack." And then we went to the surf shop, and they said that was the first shark attack in over 20 years, and the guy was out alone, and there was just a whole bunch of circumstances that were just not good common sense in terms of that. And then I was out on the board. I was swimming back out to catch another wave, and I was getting ready to duck under a wave, and I don't know, it was maybe 20 meters ahead of me, and all of a sudden something pops out of the wave, and I froze, and then it was a sea lion.
Uh,
So, and I had to laugh to myself because clearly I was, it was triggering that fear in me. So yeah, I think, look, it's important to recognize that, fears are something that we develop. They can be super helpful for us. They can drive us in the right situations. I think it's just, I'm a strong believer that if you have a good level of awareness and a good sense of intuition, that you'll be able to navigate life without needing fears to be the guide rather than your intuition. And you gave a perfect example, and I know the story of the guy who walked the high wires and then did fall at the end. And that's I notice it in sport all the time too. When you're feeling relaxed, when you get into that flow state, you're not in a fear state. You're not afraid, and I think that is a big one when you let the pressure get to you. That's being overcome by fear, right?
yeah, I mean, there is something that I think that I can recognize in myself, but also I think that all of us have, and we're talking about how fears are developed through experience, but also how we can deal with them through our experiences, right? Um, and I mean, and sport is a easy example. I'm amazed by these athletes that fall and get super injured, or have a really big accident. If it's Formula One or downhill skiing or whatever, and you crash you're lucky to still be alive, and then they get right back into it, right, and do it again. I think that's fantastic. And how do you overcome that? And it can be about, I mean, let's just say presentation skills, right? I know some people are terrified of doing presentations, public speaking, that kind of stuff. And maybe it's because they felt like they did a bad performance at some time, or they were laughed at. And I've had instances in my life where I felt a little bit insecure, and I didn't do a good job with that. And then I recognize, let's say if it's a public speaking or presentation or something, and I recognize that that's coming back a little bit, it triggers something, right? But then just the experience, I've had this before, I've overcome it, just stick with it, and I'm able to get back on track. But there's something happening there. There's a warning bells, like the warning system is flashing, saying you're getting into dangerous territory now, like take control of the situation. And then, how do you deal with that? Do you sort of, does it become overwhelming so you freak out and, oh, I can't do this? Or, okay, I step into it. I can do this. It's, I don't have all the answers here, but it's fascinating when you recognize that, that state, and then that you have the choice. What do I do with this right now? Right?
That's
Have you
why.
felt that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I really emphasize that awareness of when fear is driving you, when fear is motivating the decisions or your behaviors, because of course we've all experienced fear. And it's just understanding how to navigate it, how to deal with it. So that awareness is really important. And that's why I see fear as this beneficial resistance. I mean, if you went through life with a complete absence of fear, I don't think that would be healthy either, right? I think you need that contrast. It's just that far too many people, some of the worst decisions ever made were decisions made out of fear. And I think that for me is the problem that I have, is where if people live too much based on their fears. And look, I mean, the perfect example is the times we're currently living in, and all the different information, and people are scrambling to try and figure things out. When there's uncertainty, there's a great deal of fear. So it's important to find ways to navigate the fear, not to push it away, but to be present with it, recognize it, and find ways to work through it. I think that builds a lot of resilience, and that builds a lot of confidence. It's a big part of our development. I like to look at it as, when you go to the gym, you're lifting the weights. The weights are the resistance that make you stronger. And for me, the fear is that weight, that you have to push through, overcome, find ways to get through. But I actually had a question for you. I don't know if you're happy to share your answer with everybody that may be listening. But so, are you willing to talk about your biggest fear in life?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, definitely. I need to think about what it is. I mean, that's a really big question.
Yeah.
The biggest fear in life.
I actually like to ask. It's one that I like to ask a lot of my coaching clients, because it can really, for one, if they haven't thought about it, it gives a lot of food for thought. But also, when they acknowledge it and start to recognize all the places that it's affecting their decisions in life. But while you think about it, I can tell you mine. For me, okay. I think my biggest fear is not achieving my potential, not fulfilling my potential, and it makes sense that's why I would be coaching. My slogan is your guide to the best you, and my whole approach to my philosophy of coaching is that we all have more potential within us. So the reason I coach is because I want to help people achieve their own highest potential. So there's just a lot of that fear that is present there in the way I've defined things, but it's done in a way that I'm overcoming my fear, rather than it's not that fear is driving my choices, or it's been part of the process of my own personal development. And I'm wanting to pass that on. So, and I think that whenever I work with someone, when we have these conversations, or when I work with someone I'm coaching, I tend to get something out of it. There's something reflected back to me, and I'm able to grow from that, and that all helps me in the achievement of my own goal of achieving my own highest potential. But there is a fear there that, you know, I'm going to reach the end of my life and I'm not going to have overcome the things I wanted to overcome. I'm not going to have achieved the level of success, because I'm a late bloomer in a lot of ways. You know, I let a lot of my fears hold me back. You know, I didn't really start my journey of personal development until my early 30s. You know, there was a lot of personal things I had to overcome first, and so I think now that I've become aware, you know, now I see. Look, if I had known, and this is something that drives something I'd like to do at some point as well, is working with teenagers, working with youth, and helping them see their own potential. Because if I'd recognized the amount of things, the potential we have, not just me, anyone has at a young age, just the things you can accomplish in a life are amazing. So that's my biggest fear.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, to be honest, I'm listening kind of with one ear here, because I'm thinking about that question still. And for me, what comes to mind? It's interesting. I mean, it's two thoughts. Well, the instant image that appears for me when you talk my biggest fear is that something is my role as a parent. You know, what if anything would happen to my kids, or if I would lose my kids or my wife, if something would happen to them. I guess that would be my biggest fear, actually. It literally makes me afraid. At the same time, of course, I realize that that's completely out of my control for most parts, and I'm definitely not one of these micromanaging parents that is overprotecting in every way, because it's part of living with that fear, and development is also about facing your fears and learning from your mistakes, and, you know, growing your comfort zone, or whatever metaphors you want to use it. So I mean, that's interesting. That one of my biggest fears is something that I can't really control, but it's always this balance of protecting and nurturing, I guess, in that role. The other part of my thoughts about this is also about what you mentioned, I guess, and maybe that's why we're choosing this kind of work. It's about personal development, and I think I got a lot from my dad and my brother, and just people around me, that, you know, if you can do anything, you know, you can achieve anything. And I mean, you can define success in many ways, and I'm very happy with where I am, and with the mindset that I'm pretty sure that if I put my head into something, or really my mind into something, I'm pretty sure I can do it if I just want it enough, right? Obviously there are certain things that I can, but I mean, it's something about achievement there, and willing to. I mean, you talked about lifting weights. If you train hard enough, then you can lift those 100 kilos or whatever it is. This sense of achievement that you can do that's fantastic. That's fantastic. And I don't know if it's really fear, but it's related to that, to stepping out of, actually stepping into that zone and facing a challenge that you're pretty sure that if you try hard enough, you're going to achieve it. And sometimes I like those challenges. Of course, it's not too much. And if it's more to my choice, then it's easier. If it's something that is forced upon me, I might have a completely different reaction. But if I have the autonomy to choose the challenges that I want, I'm pretty happy to face that. Is that fear? I don't know. It's something there about achievement.
Yeah, it's the overcoming of fear. I think just like people think that dopamine is part of the reward center. It rewards the anticipation of a reward, rather than, so you get the hit of dopamine, before you get in the anticipation of the reward rather than afterwards, right? So and so I think that maybe that's not a good comparison, but I think what happens is it's the overcoming of the fear, not the fear itself, that can be really a big driver. And I can totally relate to what you mean, because I remember, and I mean, I still am not super comfortable with heights, but one of the things that I did in my younger years is I started skydiving. I did a static line jump, and I loved it. And then as I started to progress and did my accelerated free fall ticket, and then I started jumping out of planes by myself, and then with other people, and that was every time I jumped, I felt like I had beaten death. It was like I'd overcome this fear. But the thing is, I realized from that experience that I had really reframed things. So when I was in that plane and the door opened and I looked down, I couldn't really relate to how far down it was. And then just after having that first experience of that rush and that first success doing it, from there on, it wasn't just the adrenaline. It was this complete sense of freedom. And then every successful landing, I built more confidence, and I wanted to continue to push myself. And so pushing through that fear, they talk the same about a really simple thing like taking cold showers is a great way to build your confidence, because you know what's coming. You're not going to like it. And yet, if you get yourself up every morning and you can get into a cold shower, it really helps build your confidence, because you're overcoming whatever. It's similar to a sense that resistance you have, that fear of, this is going to be freezing, right? And for me, that taking that first step out of the plane and getting into free fall, there's no room for thinking about, well, what if the parachute doesn't open? Well, then I have a reserve. What if that one, if you get into that, just like the guy who did I think he walked high wires between skyscrapers, right, in cities.
Exactly.
Yeah. And just as soon as you open the door for fear, it becomes debilitating. Whereas if you can recognize it, and this is something that I talk to people about when we're dealing with fear, is a lot of times fear kind of lurks in the periphery, or it's in the back of our minds rather than being right in front of us. And I find a lot of times the things we're most afraid of, if we look them head on, and it would really break it down in size. It wouldn't be quite as overwhelming. A lot of the times things get overwhelming because the associated thoughts, we build them up into something worse than they are. And I think that sense of achievement is often when we look back at the things we were afraid to do and we accomplish that, and we go, it wasn't as hard as I thought. It wasn't as, or maybe it was really challenging, but I did it. I'm up to the challenge. I'm strong enough to do it. So I think this is what I'm talking about when it's having that awareness of fear, where it is in your body, where it is in your mind, how big is the danger really, just having a real sense of awareness of that. And then when you can have an awareness of the fear itself and the effect that it has on you, you can take so much more control of your life on a personal level, in a professional level. And a lot of our personal fears are playing out in the workplace, playing themselves out in our relationships, and they drive a lot of the behaviors that are self-destructive, that are counter to our own benefit, so we think of them as keeping us safe, and that's why I like to reframe the whole idea of fear. That it is that resistance, it is that challenge, but it's something that is only a benefit to us if we're really aware of it and we control the way it drives us forward. You understand what I'm saying there?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm getting two thoughts in my mind there, and they are related. And I think what you're talking about here, if we sense that there is a fear, or there's something blocking us, but we can't really know what it is, then it becomes really difficult to deal with, and that can be very unsettling, I think, right? There's something there stopping me. I don't know what it is, and that can create a lot of anxiety or doubt or whatever, right? And really, inflicting or influencing your self-confidence.
Yeah, the biggest fear that we have is the unknown. The things that the fears, the dangers that could be out there that we're not even aware of, right? And you think about in our society how much the unknown drives our fears. Sorry, didn't want to interrupt your flow of thought there.
No, but because it goes back to, I mean, you mentioned the workplace, and if I just go back to what I was talking about before, that there's a very strong difference of trying to achieve something and nerd or sort of searching for that the pleasure of achievement rather than the fear of not succeeding with something. And as a leader, the role that you can play in motivating others around that, right? If you can, and I guess, I mean, everybody's talking about the transformational leader or the coaching leader or whatever, able to make that shift, right? How do you create that? The sense of achievement, and what would the possibilities if we can grow and develop this and we can achieve this, rather than if you don't achieve this, something's bad is going to happen to you. What does that make for your motivation or for your engagement or whatever? I mean, I can really feel it within myself, just what I'm talking about, and it's such a big difference. But if well, I guess what I'm saying is that if I as an individual, or if me as an individual, I can't really understand the fears that are around me and how they are impacting me, it's even more difficult for the leader to understand the fears for the co-worker, right? So it takes a very in-depth conversation and a lot of trust to be able to open that box, right, and then deal with it. So it's not an easy thing to just just deal with your fears, right? It's a hard one.
You've mentioned a whole bunch of things that I'd love to touch on there. But first of all, yes, the having an awareness of your own fears will then help you be more empathetic. And we've talked about that one before. It helps you lead with empathy, but empathy obviously helps you in relationships as well, because when you can recognize your own fears and how they negatively impact you, then you can imagine that other people are also, having fears and anxieties, and I think it puts things in a different perspective when you see someone getting angry, or you see someone acting irrationally, or when you see someone making choices that are unproductive. I find myself, when you can see that person as someone who's afraid rather than a bad person, or someone who's makes poor choices or whatever, it takes some of the judgment away. When you realize that the way someone is responding is just a fear response, then you can start to address, well, what are they afraid of? And you can have more empathy for their situation. It doesn't mean that you need to let them get away with it or let them walk all over you, but it means that you can recognize it's not that they, they have a bad temper, and they may do, but when you recognize that it's fear-driven, that puts that whole thing in perspective a little better. At least I find that helps me to avoid judgment. And then the trust piece is also super important. We know how important it is in the workplace. Developing trust is a foundation of building a solid team. It's a foundation of having good relationships. And so, we're a species that lives from cooperation. So without trust, it's really hard to cooperate. But that fundamental fear is a really big factor in undermining trust, because people talk about game theory and the whole piece about, you may know the example of where you have the two people who've been caught for a crime, and if the one guy if they both don't admit to anything, then they get a certain amount of years. Yeah, exactly. So that is very fear driven, right? It's like, well, what will the other person decide? And you try and put yourself in their shoes, but you're letting fear drive your perspective, and so that it's things like that, the game theoretic approach to life, or just this fear that undermines your trust. when you look at, I think about personal relationships and the amount of times our own fears and own insecurities, they undermine relationships and destroy relationships, both in our private lives and, in the workplace. You think that a colleague is out to get you, and you see everything as competition, rather than trying to build cooperation and bring people, convince people rather than trying to undermine them so you can push your own agenda through. There's just so many examples of where, if you recognize that it was fear driving things, and the degree to which fear undermines trust, which is the foundation of having good working relationships and personal relationships. That if you can have an awareness just around that alone, you'd be a huge step ahead, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's kind of zero-sum thinking, or that's driving international relationships, negotiations, domestic politics, you name it. It's so. But I'm thinking though, so what is the antidote to that? What are we looking for here, right? So it's something about how do you establish that trust, and we've been talking about purpose, for example. What is our common purpose? If I go back to the leadership circle, and there's something there in the middle, and this comes back in, I think, most leadership development theories. I mean, if you look a little bit on statistics, it seems like what the followers, what they're looking for in a leader is someone who's honest, someone they feel they can trust. And that goes into role modeling, and eventually in the leadership circle, they talk about authenticity. So just finding out, being open about your fears, having an open agenda, being transparent in that sense, but also having the awareness and leading with a purpose, or living with a purpose rather, right? It seems to be so much in that area. This is a different podcast conversation that we can talk about next time maybe. But there seems to be so much in that spectrum of authenticity and honesty that, for me at least, seems to be the antidote to all of these fear-driven behaviors and patterns. So I think there's something in there that we can dig into maybe next time.
Yeah, and I think conversely, fear is what undermines a lot of the authenticity and trust and honesty. It's hard to be honest when you're afraid of how people will judge you. It's hard to be your authentic self when you're worried about the way people will see you or whether they will accept you. But one of the antidotes, I guess, if you want to call it that, and this is something that I generally, in terms of any change or any overcoming any challenge, the coaching statement I've been using for years and years is awareness allows change. So if you can become aware of it, then you can change it. You have to bring it up to the surface. And so a lot of our fears lie beneath the surface in our unconscious, in our programming and experiences that we've had from the past. So you bring them up to the surface, and you look them head on. That will give you the opportunity to overcome them. A lot of people don't like to face their fears, and it's something like when I coach people through their comfort zone. I say, look at the comfort zone as this circle, and you're wanting to expand the circle. But the problem is if you take a small step outside of your circle of comfort, you can probably handle it. Some people, the reason they fail is they take too big of a step outside their comfort zone, their circle of comfort, and then they're overwhelmed by fear. When you become overwhelmed by fear, then you're out of your depth. You've got to go back to square one.
It can be anxiety, or just way in over your head, kind of.
Yeah. So when you have an awareness of it, and you understand your comfort level, that's really important, because if you go too far and you become, and you get to the level of terror or some extreme sense of fear, it can put you back further than where you were before, right? Because now you tried to get there, and you were totally overwhelmed by your fear, and that now it becomes even more real for you than it was before, right? So that's why I think awareness is important. Small steps in the direction of overcoming it are important. Stay within your ability to manage your fear. So I think those are a couple of things. But I think in terms of remedies, I really like, as I said, bringing it to the surface, looking at it head on, but also reframing things, right? Because we make mountains out of molehills. We because things are kind of our fears are sometimes unclear, undefined, in the back of our heads, in our periphery. Because of that, sometimes our thoughts make them, and beliefs make them worse than they actually are. And so just reframing things. A perfect one is where you talked about having this fear of speaking, right? And you feel this anxiety. But if you can, I've heard it said before, if you can translate that into excitement, if you can reframe it and going, well, what I'm feeling is not fear, what I'm feeling is excitement. I'm excited to go and share this message and share my knowledge. If you can reframe it that way, it's a big step in the right direction of overcoming fears. So looking at things and reframing things is a really big aid.
Yeah, I mean, you're kind of talking about coaching support and coaching helps, and I think that's right. I mean, in personal development, coaching can be a fantastic help of mirroring these fears or getting perspectives on these fears and just increasing that awareness. I think we should be pay some attention to the level of fear as well here. But I mean, we're not psychologists at all or psychiatrists, and if it's a state where it's if it's clinical depression or anxiety or something like that, that's something that you probably have to deal with from another profession through a professional psychologist or something. And if it's what do you call it in English? The KBT,
cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT.
Yeah. CBT in English. Yeah, it's KBT in Sweden. Or there's different techniques to deal with, and that's something, not anything that I'm skilled in. But just what I'm saying is that just having an awareness about the level. Is this something that is completely, having an enormous impact on my life, keeping me of getting out of bed? Then it's another kind of support.
Absolutely.
But for personal kind of day-to-day development, I think that's more on the level what we're talking about, right?
Yeah, that kind of relates to what I was talking about. That your circle of comfort and then taking a step too far out. Also, if like I say, if people feel terror or if they're debilitated by their fear, then you've gone too far. You're not ready to go that far yet. And obviously things that are phobias or that have a severe psychological effect. Again, that's something that's not something to be worked on a coaching level. That's definitely therapy. And when someone comes to me and there's some kind of a trauma from their past, I wouldn't try to coach someone through post-traumatic stress syndrome if they're coming back from having in a war zone, whether as a soldier or as a refugee. That's not something I would try and coach people through. Those are extreme fears, certainly. But the thing is, those can also be overcome. It just is a different process, and it takes a little bit more time. And there it comes to down to being patient with yourself. I think if you try and there are people who try and expose themselves to things that scare them. They go to extremes. And I'd say there's probably a fear in there as well, right? They want to be so strong that they could face any fear, and so they go to extreme lengths and face severe danger just as a way of proving they're not afraid. I don't think that's a healthy relationship to have with fear. You need to understand the level that you can handle, and once you learn those skills of facing your fear in an incremental way, that's a healthy process, you can, there's just so many things you can overcome, and so many more, you can unlock so much more of your potential through doing that.
Ah, ah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we're talking a lot about the individual level here, but I'm also, I mean, on a team level or the organization level, what are we focusing on? A lot of organizations, they're kind of driven by the fear of their competitors, what they're doing. Oh, look at how good they're, instead of focusing on what are our strengths, what's our strategy, what are we good at, what do we want to utilize, and then and of course also having conversations around these fears, but how it can also impact the whole culture of an organization or a team, right? It's and then we'll come back to this again. Are you playing not to lose or playing to win? And there's a real difference in that dynamic.
Big time. And like, you can see it at every level of our society. So think about your kids. How many times have you said, if you do that, you're going to be in big trouble, or you're going to have this punishment? That's a fear. You're using fear to drive a behavior, right? And then look at our criminal justice system. If you do this, and I'm not saying that we don't need to have some repercussions for consequences for people's actions, but I'm just saying that fear is a tool that we use very frequently. And in the workplace, if you fail, you lose your job. Is that really good? Because we learn from our failures, right? And so when you especially see it in companies or organizations where you've had a lot of layoffs, a lot of redundancies. And so it's become, and Simon Sinek talks about this very well, very articulately, that it wasn't until the 80s that companies used layoffs or redundancies as a means of balancing their financial books, right? We're not going to hit our numbers for the year. We're going to have to let go of a bunch of people. That was never an option previously, and it's a strategy that was developed only in the last 40 years. And so what happens when you do that? Well, you have one round of layoffs, okay, but if you consistently, and I worked in an organization that consistently had restructuring and layoffs, and what you start to get is people that are just covering their back, right? They're covering their own back, and they work in silos, there's less cooperation, and it's a very fear-driven environment. And if that's the kind of culture that you have, you lose out on creativity, you lose out on people taking risks and innovation. There's just so many negative aspects of developing a culture, a fear-based culture. And there are still leaders who believe that, I want to keep, all my employees on the edge of their seat, worried about their jobs, because they think that that's going to drive them forward. And this comes back to my original point about fear. Yes, it can be a really interesting resistance challenge for you to overcome. But if your driver is fear, if the thing that's motivating your behavior is fear, it's not productive, and you're going to make poor choices, and especially with an organization.
Yeah, but it's, if we're looking at this from a, say, 40-year perspective, then it's about the same time span we're looking at learning organizations. And every organization nowadays are aspiring to be a learning organization. How we can do that, and I generally think that organizations are getting better at knowledge management and becoming that learning organization, learning from our mistakes and at a faster speed, etc., etc. However, when something bad happens, like when it's a crisis, if it's the financial crisis in 2008, or if it's COVID-19 or whatever, you see the organizational behavior, how that changes very, very quickly, right? Then you start reacting to the fear in a very, not necessarily, but in many cases, unproductive way, right? And I think that's when these things are happening. When something bad is happening, or you're perceiving that something bad is happening, then you kind of get to a panic situation. Oh, I need to lay off people. I need to, clean this mess up very, very quickly on a short-term basis, because I need to deliver to the stakeholders or whatever. But in that situation, when you're struck by fear, to make a conscious choice of looking at the options here. How can we deal with this in a constructive way that is going to be long-term beneficial? Whew, that's not an easy thing to do. And I think that's where you see these kind of behaviors coming in. Then we see the layoffs, and then we step away from these learning organization behaviors.
Yeah, you get these knee-jerk reactions. You have very short. Remember what we talked about, the effect that it has on you biologically, right? When you're in that fear state, you get that tunnel vision. You get very short-sighted. Exactly, yeah. It's only about surviving in the moment. And so when we let our fears overcome us and our organizations, then you start to make very short-sighted decisions, very knee-jerk, very reactionary. And then, well, you've got to do something, right? You've got to do something because everybody's afraid and you want to appease them. But if you have a clear strategy, you have a vision for your organization, you know that there's going to be bumps in the road. You know there are going to be challenges to overcome. And that doesn't mean you don't have to navigate those and make some adjustments. But a lot of times fear will make people overreact, and they'll have a 180-degree swing, and that's not going to be beneficial for you either. When you completely, we talked before about values. When fear makes you completely abandon your values, you know you're going to end up in a bad place, right? So
and then you have to start over again afterwards. So then you have to kind of start from zero to build up, and Absolutely. So I guess risk management, and there's so much elements that comes into this, but there's a lot of important aspects of organizational behavior when it comes to fear as well. And how does the organization actually deal with it?
Exactly, and that's why, whether it's on a personal level or an organizational level, to recognize what are the what fear behaviors do we see in our culture. What fear behaviors do we have on a leadership level? Think about the higher you get up in a hierarchy, the more pressure you have, the more, if you don't know how to manage your fear, the more you will make kind of reactionary, short-sighted decisions. And when you have people in a leadership level that are insecure on certain levels or about certain things, and then you see this in Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of the team. The fear that leads to a lack of trust, or the fear of conflict, and not being willing to debate things and say your true opinion, be authentic, or voice your concerns because everyone might disagree. Well, then you have people who will nod their heads, but they don't commit, right? They don't commit, and then when there's a lack of commitment, then there's no one's held accountable because you on some level people recognize that it's the system that's broken. And then when you get involved in all these politics, and I never really believed in that decision anyway, there's no accountability, and then people lose sight of the results. And these are the things that happen in organizations all the time, and they're fear driven. Like, fear gets us off track in so many different ways. But when we encounter things like the financial crisis or the situation we're in now, and we recognize the fears that it raises in us, and then we rise to the occasion, right? We take those incremental steps. We make some adjustments so that we reduce the danger, we reduce the risks, but not to the degree that we stifle ourselves or that we make a huge step backwards. I mean, think about whether it's like race relations or whatever. You look at September 11th and the things that it did for people, Middle Eastern people or Muslim people living in the U.S. All of a sudden there was this reactionary response where there was a percentage of the population that put all the blame there. When you go back to World War II, when the U.S. and Japan were at war, all of a sudden these Japanese people who were like second, third generation Japanese were put in internment camps. Like that, those are extreme examples of fear where it's a reactionary thing that that's meant to that's meant to help people soothe their fears, but they're not. That doesn't make them right. We often make other people responsible for our fear.
Finding scapegoats or something. And I mean, now you see the increase of violence against Asian people, especially in the U.S.
Absolutely.
And there's no evidence, but it's probably originated in the U.S.-China relations, right?
Yeah. And I can give you a really a simple example. When I had my dog, if you know, you never know why a dog might be afraid of a certain person. Even with the foster dogs that I have, the last one I had, she was afraid of men, certain men. She just set them off, whether it was the way they were dressed, their motions, and it made her bark at them. I had her on the leash, but people were like, would get upset about that. Obviously, it was a fear response, so I don't judge them for it. But they blamed the dog for their fear, right? Mm-hmm. But it was really they sensed danger and they responded to it with fear. And with anything in life, when you start to recognize, other situations aren't responsible for your fear. Your fear is your own. Take ownership of it, right? And that doesn't mean that people have the right to intimidate you or make you afraid, but recognizing you can't control those circumstances, those people, and the only way that you're going to find power is to find your own way of overcoming fear, right? You walk down a back alley and there's someone else that you encounter, you could be afraid of them and you could have a very negative response to them, but it could be that they're also just innocently walking through that back alley and will do nothing. Mm. And so you could be projecting. I think it's important to recognize that sometimes your fears are justified, right? And that's that intuitive kind of recognizing when there's danger. But a lot of times our fears are unfounded. And I think coming back to the whole finding a level of awareness around your fear helps us quantify or even define the fear, what it is, and the degree to which that it's real, or the degree to which the danger is real to us. I think that's a really important process to go through, and that can be personally or in organizations, right?
And I think I've mentioned this a few times before, but these questions about what's at risk, right? So what's at risk if I do this, and just layer by layer, opening that onion and seeing and trying to find what the original fear or the false assumption that is referred to is, what it actually is. And very often we find that it's uncalled for, right? It's a false assumption. It's not real.
Isn't the acronym false evidence appearing real? That's the acronym for fear. And even going further, when you look at prejudice and racism, that's all fear-based, and so many of our negative responses are fear-based. And when we recognize that, we'll feel less justified in getting angry, in being arrogant. I even look at things like jealousy and greed are very much fear-driven kind of emotional responses, and so. Again, it all comes back to awareness. Awareness allows change, and when you can recognize that that you're being driven by fear, and that the fear is not you're not putting the responsibility of that fear on external circumstances, but recognizing that it's something that's happening within you, and you have the power to overcome it. Doesn't mean that you become reckless or discard the feeling, because when you feel things, it's a communication from within, and you can orient it. But I think that's where the back to my original reason for wanting to have this topic is, it's all about understanding what fear is doing with you, understanding what it really is, recognizing it in your environment, the feedback mechanism that's assessing danger, and so often we overassess the danger because it's not real. It's something in our minds that we're projecting into the future, or we're pulling from past experience, right?
Yeah. I mean that kind of summarizes both the importance, but I guess the key points of the conversation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, look, I've become cognizant of not wanting to drain people's attention spans. So maybe we'll wrap it up here today, because it is, I think, a lot of the topics we choose we can talk hours on end about these things. But yeah, I think that's kind of, I think that's enough for today. I really, my intention today was really wanting to raise people's awareness around their own fears and how they're responding to them. And hopefully our conversation today will have given people food for thought.
I mean, it's certainly, has for me. I think every time we have these conversations, you get ideas, and it's interesting how you can connect to a lot of the previous conversations that we've had. That, I mean, there's a pattern in all of these conversations and topics that are leading into hopefully the same direction, or the same purpose at least, right?
Yeah, well, I hope to have actually. I think one of our topics in the future will have to be, or I'd like it to be, systemic thinking or systemic principles, because everything is interconnected, right? It's life is a complex system with lots of feedback loops, and I think that it's a lot of fun to play with it when you can recognize those patterns.
Yeah. Oh, maybe it's time for that next time then, right?
Yeah.
When you can choose your topic.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. We've got plenty to come. So yeah. Any last thoughts around fear that you want to leave people with?
I think we kind of summarized it, but I mean, just setting the. I mean, it's still morning for us here, and then just thinking, setting the intention for the rest of the day, or actually for the rest of the week, since this is the first working day after the Easter holidays. But just having I don't want to say live fearlessly, but live really making that the topic of the week, kind of having a fear conscious week. Just really trying to pay attention to that and see what kind of difference that makes. Maybe you can remind me next time, and we can have a look at how it went. Right, but I think that's going to be the sort of the theme for the week, having a fear conscious week.
Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, I think I'd like to leave people with something from Byron Katie. She in her work, she talks about, or she encourages people when they're having these thoughts and these beliefs that are very fear-based, and she talks about asking the question, is that true? Eckhart Tolle also talks about, is that so? And I think that's the one thing I'd like to leave people with is, start to look at your fears and ask yourself, is that true? Is that a real danger? Is that a real risk? So yeah, I encourage people to think about this, self-reflect, recognize where their fears are, and then ask themselves that question: is that true? Is that so? Is that a real danger? And I think that'll get people off on the right path anyway.
Yeah. What's at risk? That's what has worked for me, but it's a similar kind of question, right?
Absolutely, it's based on the same thing. So great. Thanks again for the conversation today, Toby. As always, it was great. I'd just like to remind everybody, if they want to get hold of you, they can find you, Tobias Demker, on LinkedIn. Myself, you can find me on my website, peterteuscher.com. And I'd like to remind everyone, if you're watching this on YouTube, we'd love to get you to subscribe or like. If you think this information or this content is going to be beneficial for someone else, then feel free to share. Again, I'd like to remind people to send us your comments, or if you have a request for a topic we should cover, please let us know. We'd be happy to have an open discussion about that. So with that, Toby, I wish you a great week. Until we speak again, my friend, I'm looking forward to our next chat. And for now, thanks everyone for joining us. Have a great day. Be well, and we'll speak soon.
Cheers.